Good morning. I'm excited to be here today. And in today's passage, Jesus is going to crash a funeral and bring a corpse back to life.
Yes.
I was thinking, must have been amazing to be one of Jesus's followers and just witness such miracles time and time again.
Yes.
From being at healing the blind, the lame. And then this time, he's actually going to bring someone back from the dead during a funeral service. And what makes it amazing is he's going to just speak.
Yeah.
And it happens.
Yeah.
Now, this miracle will show that Jesus is greater than both Elijah and Elisha because they both raised the dead, but they had to plead with God for mercy in order to do it.
Yeah.
Where in today's passage, Jesus just walks up to the boy or the young man, says a few words, and he comes back to life.
Amazing.
So I hope this passage also helps ease people who have problems about death, lots of fears, and remember that Jesus will simply speak a word and will raise us from the dead. So this should encourage Christians to know that Jesus raises the dead and he doesn't have to do any difficult thing or anything. He just simply speaks and it happens.
Yeah.
This is podcast 44. Jesus crashes a funeral and resurrects a dead man in Nain, which is taken from Luke 7:11 through 17.
I believe it was D.L. Moody, who was a young man ready to do a funeral, and he wanted to find in the New Testament the funerals Jesus had done. And he found out that only Jesus raised the dead, so that wasn't very helpful, but it reminded him about to whom he was presenting the people, that he was presenting Jesus to the people. This is Pastor Kenny Burge Jr., and I'm Pastor Ken Burge Sr., and I'm thinking about our upcoming week and very encouraged. We have VBS, but it's not just a VBS. It's a vacation Bible school whereby you have created a material that'll be used. How special is that? Can you tell everybody about that?
So with my curriculum, I created my animated show.
Yeah.
I created, PowerPoints, keynotes, everything free. You can just download it, coloring pages. So we kind of did a VBS out of it. We did last year, which was the Christmas theme.
Yeah.
Because we're going through all of Jesus's stories in chronological order.
Right.
So this year we're looking at John the Baptist and his ministry with Jesus. So the first 4 stories, and I'm very excited about that. One of the deacons at our church, Nathan Kieran, will be actually doing the teaching.
Great.
But he's going to take the material and then he can customize it anyway he wants. And I'm kind of the troubleshooter because everything's my responsibility. I walk around if there's any problems or issues or whatever arise. I meet with that. But I'm really looking forward to it. And you can watch all the episodes for free online right now at Pastor Kenny's classroom.
Wonderful.
And you might want to explain who you are too.
Yes, I'm Dr. Ken Burge Sr., and I'm a writer, an author, coming up on book 13. And I love what Hemingway said. He said, writing is very easy. You just need to sit down at the computer and bleed. It's just a monumental amount of work, but from that comes a lot of the materials from my sermons and work that I do. And I just love the privilege we have in our partnership, not only with the podcast, but there are just so many different venues now whereby we're just throwing seed out all over the place. And it's just awesome. So glad to be back and looking forward to the account in Luke chapter 7.
Just curious, what do you think of this whole AI with pastors? Because we're in the big AI boom. And with people writing their sermons and stuff and mass producing books now with it. I know me personally, I think AI can be a great tool.
Yeah.
I use it for editing.
Sure.
Because I do many Bible studies and I like to write it all down. And I love to throw it in there and say, fix any grammar, fix anything. If, sometimes I'm writing something and it's like, it's not smooth. Here's the main thing. Can you rewrite that? And I think it's excellent for that.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of, I hear of pastors. Personally, I don't know of any who would admit to it.
Right.
I've seen it like on Twitter or X, but where people do a whole sermon or they do a whole lesson based off of AI, which I think they're not putting the work in. But I was just curious what your thoughts
I
with
appreciate
AI are.
that. I find it to be what you said. It's a great tool to supplement when we're stuck with something, to see how they might say it, because we all have those writer's blocks, creative blocks. But on the other hand, we're looking at the scripture, dual inspiration. The Spirit of God clearly has inspired the 66 books of the Bible, but God did not take out the personality of the writers. You look at Peter, he uses fishing terms. You look at the different writers and their personalities come out. And I think sometimes we're just getting to be lazy. And we want everyone else to do the work for us, and it's not the way it's meant to be.
And it's very difficult to put together studies.
Oh, yeah.
It's rewarding, but difficult. Quick story, I was at a graduation. I was asked to speak at it. There's just one of the many speakers. And I wrote the speech, and then I was on one of the young ladies at church. And then I put it through AI, just ChatGPT, nothing fancy.
Right.
And I just said, check my grammar, check stuff, because I want it to be, really good, because I'm in front of a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it did its thing and came back good. So I was like, okay, I'm good with this. So I'm sitting in the ceremony, and I gave my speech, and everyone did their little speeches, and the pastor, whoever came up, and he just starts ranting. And his quote was, "AI is of the devil, there's a demon in it." So one of the men from our church was there, Jay, and I looked to him and said, "Oh no, I just used a demon for my speech." But AI, just real quick, I just think it's an excellent tool. It's like the internet. It can be used for evil, but it can be used for a lot of good. It's like anything. You can use a hammer to build something up, or you can use it to hurt somebody or do something horrible with it. So it's just a tool. But
can't wait for podcast 45. I get to expel your demon.
But
that's funny.
Totally different topic.
Yes.
I just think it's interesting what people are talking about now.
Exactly.
So here we are in Luke 7, and Jesus, it's just a very dynamic, I know I use that word a lot, but it is passage, but let's just get right to it.
Yeah.
So if you're following along, this is in verse 11 of Luke 7, and let's get to it. Afterwards, he was on his way to a town called Nain. His disciples and a large crowd were traveling with him. So afterwards refers to our previous podcast and also earlier in the chapter when Jesus healed the centurion's servant. So Jesus traveled from Capernaum to Nain. From what I could get from research, both were in the region of Galilee, which is clear. And it was about a 25 to 30 mile walk roughly, and would have taken a day or so to walk it. Those people, they walked.
Yes, they walked.
It puts us to shame,
Yes.
And Nain was only about 6 miles from Jesus's hometown of Nazareth. So Jesus would have been very familiar with this town. It's very possible that many of the people knew him. Now, when I taught this Bible study, I did it at the young adult ministry, and I had a picture of Nain, and it was taken in the year 1900, which I thought was pretty cool because it had, people in their traditional dress and all that stuff. But if you look at the city of Nain, right behind it is Mount Tabor, and on that mountain, a lot of stuff happened. Deborah and Barak's army marched down and destroyed, Sisera's army. We remember that from Judges 4. Gideon executed Midianite kings there. And many people think that is where Jesus was possibly transfigured. I haven't done a lot of research on that myself, but at least that's what a lot of people have said in commentaries and so forth. And also, if you look at this picture of Nain, you see the mountain in the back, and then you see this giant valley, which is the valley of Jezreel. And this is where Armageddon is. And this is where the final battle of Armageddon will take place. Napoleon was there, said it's the most incredible battlefield he's ever seen. And so there's a lot around the city of Nain. So just kind of paint a picture in your brain of what's going on there.
I find it interesting. The previous account, the centurion, what is he noted for? Great faith. Here's a young man who's dead. He doesn't have any faith. The widow doesn't seem to know Jesus either. And it's just like Jesus. I mean, there are times he wants someone to express faith. We'll see Jairus has faith that Jesus can raise his daughter. And on other occasions, it has nothing to do with the person. He's just displaying who he is. And I always just chuckle because there's such unpredictability here with what Jesus is always going to do. His disciples must have gone each day and said, what's coming today?
And I think it happened so quick. I think a lot of these miracles were bang, bang.
They were.
Lazarus is a rare one because he walks to the tomb.
Sure.
But this seems like it's just quick.
Yeah.
So verse 12, just as he neared the gate of the town, okay, so he's still on the road. He's getting near to the gate, just to picture this in your mind.
Yeah.
A dead man was being carried out. I noticed it was interesting, a lot of artwork with this. They have a little boy, but it seems like it was a young man or maybe a teenager somewhere around there, but it was a young man was being carried out dead, okay? He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the town was also with her.
Yeah.
So I kind of picture this in my mind. Here comes Jesus. He's just gave a sermon on the plain. He just healed that man who was dying.
Yeah.
And he has this large crowd. He's very popular at this time. Then coming from the city is another large group, but it's a funeral procession.
Yeah.
And I would kind of get the idea both groups are kind of checking each other out.
Sure.
You know, who's this young 30-year-old guy with this giant crowd and, you know, all these mourners, which were probably obvious what they were doing. So here they come. And the Jewish mourning custom involved the community gathering together, and they would grieve. They would hire professional mourners who were hired to lament at funerals.
Yeah.
Talk about showy.
I'm telling you.
It's like, it's kind of like paying someone to say, cry for me when I die.
Exactly.
It reminds me of Herod. When he died, he took captive a lot of the Jewish leaders. And they said, soon as I die, I want you to execute all of these important people, because then throughout the land, people will cry for me.
Yeah.
Not for me, but there'll be a lot of mourning,
Exactly.
you know, and it's like, oh, that's awful. But they hired these people, they come in and they're probably part of this group.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's also somewhat poetry, not in the sense that it's not literal, but I think we kind of see here's the bread of life walking into town, the resurrection and the life. And then here's a funeral and they're going to meet. So this woman is going to bury her only son. And he was the only one who could carry on the family name, at least from her. So this is heartbreaking. And the woman is a widow. So she lost her husband and her son now. And this woman is in deep grief for her only son is dead. However, she's about to meet God in human flesh.
When I read this story, it made me think of the lady from New York, and she was making her final arrangements, grabbed her pastor, said, can I talk to you? I said, there's really two things I want you to know. Number one, I'm going to be cremated. And number two, could you spread my ashes at Macy's? And the pastor looked and said, why in the world at Macy's? He goes, well, this way I know my daughter will come and see me at least twice a week. But large groups here. And you'd have to ask the question, I wonder how many people would be at my funeral, but Jesus often does things incognito. I mean, he puts everyone out when he raises Jairus' daughter, except for Peter, James, and John. But in this occasion, you have two large groups and he wants to minister. But this poor lady, she's a widow. She'd have no ability to care for herself. The son, the young man, probably was the one who could provide. And now he is gone as well. So it's not only death, but there's people who are living that are probably suffering as a result of his death.
So here he is. He walks up. And I love this in verse 13.
Yeah,
when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said, don't weep.
Yeah.
I think we always see, especially from Luke, that when Jesus has compassion, he's moved. It's more than just, oh, I feel bad.
Right.
It's he does something about it.
Yeah.
So he sees this woman's horrible state and he feels for her.
Yeah.
Now, from the woman's perspective, this probably seems super insensitive.
Yeah.
The text doesn't tell us that, but
exactly.
if I'm at my son's funeral and some stranger walks up and says, "Don't cry," it's probably obviously his demeanor. It's probably not arrogant or like a jerk, but when you're mourning the death of your child, you're probably pretty upset.
Yeah.
So her son is dead, and the stranger crashes the funeral procession and says, "Don't cry."
Yeah.
Then he came up, and this is 14a, first part of the verse. Then he came up and touched the open coffin, and the pallbearers stood still, or they stopped.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting chain of events. He came and touched a coffin while the pallbearers were still walking.
Yeah.
So they're kind of walking. The whole crowds are walking. He comes up to the woman. She's probably walking, says, "Don't weep." Quick statement.
Yeah.
And from my research, it was common to have an open casket. You often see this in funerals in the Middle East when they're, on TV from Americans' perspective.
Sure.
And from my research, a lot of people said it was common to have open caskets so that everyone could see the person's dead. No good Jew would come and touch a coffin because it would defile them.
Yeah.
Now, because usually when you touch dead people, they don't get up.
Exactly.
So in 14b, he said, "Young man, I tell you, get up."
Yeah.
So it's passages like this that challenge the false belief that Jesus was just a good man.
Exactly.
Because how do you raise the dead? And it's not like he's shooting up prayers here that we hear, anything like that. He just says, "Get up." And Jesus had the power to raise a dead man in the coffin. And it's one thing for you to say it. It's another thing for it to actually happen. Yeah. The dead man sat up and began to speak. And Jesus gave him to his mother. I wonder what he spoke.
I would love to have known what his first words were. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing about the Gospels. They just leave that out.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really enhance the story. Push more of the narrative forward. It's just an interesting fact, but
we'll be tracking them down in eternity to say, "Excuse me, what did you say?" To begin with, this all begins with compassion. Jesus is moved, and how do you say this reverently? He has to be. When you think of the nature of God, we've been through this. You have the incommunicable attributes, those that solely belong to God, like his eternality. But then you have the communicable attributes, those that belong to God, but he shares with us. Our God is compassionate. And he was moved when he saw all of this. We have to put on compassion. That's what it says in Colossians 3:12. But since he's eternally God, his nature is such that he is compassionate and he needs to do something. And he takes away the idea of her tears. And that'll happen in the future too, right? I mean, in Revelation 24, and God will wipe away every tear. But he's commanding and he's compassionate. I mean, on one hand, he's broken over this, but on the other hand, he gives the command, "Don't weep." And because he knows what's coming like that, you always see how great control he's in. If I can just add one more detail here, I find it interesting that Jesus had to come in contact with the dead to raise the dead. Now, we know he could have spoke a word at a distance, but the same is true for us when you take this and extend it, because we're around the spiritually dead all the time. You were dead in trespasses and sins. It's sort of an application because you and I can't go around and raise the dead, but we can bring the gospel to those that are spiritually dead, but we got to first come in contact with them. And Jesus does that. And I find it fascinating how he's just not intimidated. He just walks up and he's in total control, but he comes in contact with the dead. And we need to be doing the same. A lot of Christians just want to go somewhere safe and hide and just watch their little cable news and forget about the world. Jesus didn't live that way.
He went where the fish were.
Yeah, he did.
As a fisherman.
He really did.
So the man sits up and starts to speak. And chronologically, this is the first time recorded in the New Testament when Jesus raised a person from the dead. Now, it's possible he did it other places.
Sure.
Because it often says he did many miracles, things like that.
Point.
So it's very possible that he had raised the dead 10, 20, 100 times. Who knows?
That's right.
Or it could just be these total of 3 times. We don't know. But in Scripture, in the New Testament, there are 3 times where Jesus specifically raises the dead.
Right. Yeah.
Kind of interesting, 3 times. So we have this passage, the nameless man. Then we have Jairus' daughter, and then Lazarus.
Yeah.
And I guess you could throw in him raising himself from the dead, because we see from when you stitch a bunch of passages together, he says he had the power to bring himself up.
Yeah.
Then we see in other passages, God the Father, so
it's
that
great,
work together in harmony. But this miracle, and this is when I was studying, this shows that Jesus is greater than the mighty prophets Elijah and Elisha.
Good point.
And we see this. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than all the prophets. He's greater than all the kings. He's greater than David. Because Elijah in 1 Kings 17, he raised back to life the son of a widow in Zarephath.
Yeah.
However, we see him begging God and crying out to the Lord to raise the dead boy.
Exactly.
So Elijah was extremely powerful.
He was.
And yet he had to, plead to the Lord to raise this person. Then we have Elisha, his protege, who later came. And he raised the son of the Shunammite woman.
Yeah.
But like his master before, he had to pray and beg the Lord to restore the boy in 2 Kings 4.
Yeah.
However, Jesus, who is the resurrection and life, you could even say he's the one they were praying to, commanded the dead man to get up, and the man obeys. And you can draw your own conclusions on that, what the implications are. Yeah. I think it's obvious. Now, notice the response of this. And I love the first little section. Then fear came over everyone. If I'm at a funeral and some 30-year-old guy walks over, tells the dead guy to get up, and he gets up, there would be a lot of fear.
Yes.
I would be very scared. But notice what they do. Whenever Jesus does a miracle, they glorify God, saying, a great prophet has risen among us, and God has visited his people.
Yeah.
Now, among us is interesting because maybe they knew he was from Nazareth. And then the second part, God has visited his people, is a very interesting statement. Yeah. So these people were overcome with fear and awe. Yeah. I think these people understood at this point, Jesus is someone great. Here he comes in, he walks in, he has all these people with him. He has authority. He speaks, a dead person gets up. Now, some people think he is simply a great prophet. Others say, hey, God himself has visited us. And in a sense, I think both reactions were correct.
Yes.
Even in these people's ignorance, because you can't blame them.
Right.
It's probably, maybe these people knew Jesus was, but it's not implied they did. It's possible some in the crew, who knows? But this reaction is similar to other biblical encounters with divine power.
Yeah.
Moses, Isaiah, they all are in awe of God's authority. So they were right. Jesus is the prophet. Sorry, it's not Muhammad, it's Jesus.
That's right.
And he is the prophet, and he also is God. So when they say the prophet and God is basically among us, or visited his people, they're correct.
Yeah.
So, and we see that even in the Old Testament, that God would visit his people. We see that with directly with Moses, but then you have stories with Abraham when the people come and say, you will have a, so we might even say that's the incarnated Jesus, or before he became a man, I should say, the pre-incarnated.
Can you imagine trying to figure out who the Messiah would be? You go to Deuteronomy 18, Moses writes he's going to be a prophet like me. You go to Isaiah, and he's going to restore a kingdom. He's going to do all these miracles. And no wonder why they're so very confused. But there are elements where they get it because he is a prophet, but then he's more than a prophet, which is demonstrated by his acts here. But I like the idea of the holy hush in the sense when they see the power of God, they step back, fear comes upon them, and immediately, what else can they do but glorify God? It's not showtime. It's not, let's everybody start, let's work up the people. The power of God has been displayed, and all they can do is go, wow, God is great.
And just all this phoniness we see today with miracles. Yeah. It should be like Jesus. If you had the gift, you just speak or touch them, and boom, it happens. You don't have to work people into a frenzy.
Yeah.
So in verse 17, this report about him went throughout Judea and all the vicinity. So he's already popular.
That's right.
But now he's getting hyper popular. And this should make us say, who is Jesus? And we see in John 5:21, Jesus says, And just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so the Son also gives life to whom he wants.
Yes.
So this was obviously, because there's a big question we see, where does Jesus, how do his miracles and all happen? And it's hard to understand because the Father, he only does the Father's will. He does nothing of himself.
Right.
Yet it was the Father's will to give him the power to raise the dead. So we're not going to get into all the philosophical stuff, but it seems very simple that the Father gave the Son this ability, and the Son gives life to whom he wants. Well, he's in human form.
That's right.
So when Lazarus' friends died, Jesus looks at one of Lazarus' sisters and said in John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live.
Yeah.
Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?
Great question.
So, because, once you die, the moment you're with the Lord, and then, it's never like you're just gone.
Exactly.
And then 1 Thessalonians 4, we see that Jesus will raise all our loved ones who are saved at the time of the rapture, and then will raise us up. And that should remove all of our fear.
Exactly.
Because we don't have to fear death because Jesus, it's nothing to him to raise the dead.
That's right.
Anything you want to add before we get to our employment points?
3 great object lessons. Here, the nameless fella is raised from the dead. Jesus conquers death. We'll see the same with Jairus' daughter, with Lazarus. And it just should motivate us that, don't fear death. No wonder why Jesus says, don't fear those who can kill the body and do nothing more. Because as he's done this here, as he lays down his own life and takes it up again, he will do the same for us.
And I think it should just give us confidence.
Exactly.
So I have 2 employment points here. So we start with Jesus is filled with compassion.
Yeah.
So when Jesus saw the widow who had lost her son, his heart was filled with compassion, and he chose to bring her comfort by raising her son. And once again, I think this is a picture of the future kingdom where we won't have as much sorrow. Because there will be some sorrow in the kingdom, because that's before everything is made new and God wipes away every tear.
Yeah.
But you will see the power of God. Both the Father and Son are filled with compassion, and the Son had come to remedy death and suffering. So it's really just a picture of that future kingdom.
Yeah.
Question I need to ask myself. Do I understand that Jesus has not changed and is still compassionate? How does this affect my prayer life? So we look, and the same Jesus who was walking earth 2,000 years ago is still the same Jesus in heaven right now.
Yeah.
And we can pray to the Father, and he intercedes for us and is compassionate. So we shouldn't say, hey, God doesn't hear my prayers. He cares.
And in his high priestly role, that should inspire us greatly. He ever lives to make intercession for us. And even when we look at the passage over in Hebrews chapter 4 about Jesus who was tempted in all points like we, yet without sin. But then it says, let us go boldly to the throne of grace, that we might find grace and mercy to help in time of need. We need to have our God fill our hearts with compassion, because we are not inherently merciful in the same way our Lord is. And it's an interesting thing just to trace through the New Testament all the times Jesus is moved with compassion. I believe it was defeating at 4,000. He just saw people who had need and he was moved, and we should be the same way. He has a compassionate heart. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. We need to bring the same compassion to the world.
And not to shortcut the Father, he is also extremely merciful.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you see Jesus, you've seen the Father.
Exactly.
So sometimes people get this idea, well, I pray in Jesus' name because he intercedes for me because the Father, they kind of picture him as being a little harder.
Yeah.
Where I don't think that's the case.
Right.
But just people think that when you're praying to the Father's good, and then you have the Son who's interceding for you. So a lot of good stuff going on. We are very blessed. So a thought, as a Christian, am I compassionate? Do I seek to help those who are hurting and suffering, or am I too busy focused on myself and my own pleasures?
Yeah.
Jesus could have said, I'm building my kingdom, I'm preaching, I'm teaching, and just walked right on by, but he didn't. And then 2, our final point, Jesus has power over death.
Mm.
Now, we say that all the time, but we really need to stop and think of the implications of that. In this historical narrative, Jesus simply does a task that no mere man could do. He raises a dead man.
Mm-hmm.
We can't even imagine witnessing such power.
Yeah.
Our whole Christian faith is built on the fact that Jesus has the power to raise the dead. Without this hope, we have nothing at all.
That's true.
So we need to understand Jesus's power should cause us to marvel and fear him.
Yeah.
So question to ask ourselves, how does Jesus's power over life and death affect your daily life? For me, it removes my fears, and I have no doubts about death because I know what to expect. I'm not looking forward to death,
right?
But I know that Jesus will speak and I will simply come back alive. So it's not something I live in fear of.
This week, I had a friend from another church contact me. He's elderly, knows his days are limited, but his church is pastorless at this time. And he says he realized, I don't have a pastor. Would you do my funeral? He and I went to Israel together back in 1993, so we got rather close. And I said I'd be honored to do so. But the main reason he wants a pastor to do the funeral is because he'll have unsaved relatives. And on that day, I will not be able to get up and speak and have him come back to life. But the truth is, do I have faith that when I preach the gospel, that the gospel of Jesus Christ can take those who are spiritually dead and bring them to life? It's all about faith and knowing what the power of God can do. He's going to resurrect the body in the future. He says it, we believe it, but we also need to trust him now for those that are spiritually dead, that the same power will work in their lives. And when they put their faith in Christ, they're brought back to life, so to speak. So it's just a matter of faith. And I think the gospel accounts are encouraging us to just take God at his word, believe on it, have no fear, even over the greatest fear of all, perhaps, is death, and just go out and just believe in his power all the time.
And the message is in the gospel message itself.
That's right.
That's what Paul's saying when he says it's the power of God. So when the message is preached, that's what has the power. Everything's provided for. There's provision for those people. And by simply putting their faith in the message, they're saved.
That's right.
And it's not a work. It's everything has been provided for them if they simply have the faith.
Amen.
So it's all in the power of the message.
Mm-hmm.
Thought, do I live without sinful fear, knowing that Jesus will raise my body from the grave one day? Because if we have a lot of fear, we show we don't have faith. And then we start missing the mark. We're sinning if we have no faith. If I am afraid of death, what does that tell me about my walk with the Lord? And when we say afraid of death, it's, you're petrified, you won't do things.
Yeah.
Where if you have confidence that Jesus will raise the dead, there's just a peace.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're skydiving and doing foolish things.
Exactly.
It just means you have peace that, I don't want to die, but when it happens, I'm all ready for it. And I'm ready to meet my maker.
One of the things I know we're hoping as the podcast goes out is that people will see Jesus's and the Father's perfect love, because it casts out fear. Because it says in 1 John 4, fear has punishment or torment. So if we're always fearful, we're going to be so limited in what God calls us to do, because even the fear of man brings a snare. So a fear of death does the same thing. And we're called to be fearless, not because of who we are, but the one who has called us.
Before we wrap this up, I would say that sometimes Jesus's words are extremely simple. Many of the famous YouTubers and teachers of this day, they try to sound so profound.
Yeah.
And you listen to them, it's like, I have no clue what they're saying because they're trying to be so deep.
Yeah.
Where when you really look at Jesus, so many things that he says, it makes so much common sense that it hurts our brain because it's so simple. Now, obviously, there's parables and things like that, but you can still understand them. Where I think it's just amazing. Jesus says, get up. He didn't have to go into some philosophical big speech about, whatever. He just says it and it happens. So that was podcast 44. Jesus crashes a funeral and resurrects a dead man in Nain, which was taken from Luke 7:11 through 17. Before we wrap up, anything you want to share personally going on with you, or anything you'd like to tell us about?
When you scatter seed, you have to trust God to give the fruitfulness. We just have to do two things, I really think, and it's really simple, and God keeps reminding me of this. Number one is just to abide in him. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him will bear much fruit. And then Jesus adds, for without me, you can do nothing. So this is all a faith journey for all of us. And if we really believe what God's word teaches, then we lose our lives here and find his new life for us and are productive. So number one, I just want to encourage everybody, just remain in the realm of walking with Jesus. You'll be fruitful if you do that. Number two, anticipate his return. How encouraging he conquers death, but he conquered his own death, and as a result will come back, because John says, now little children, abide in him, that when he appears, we might have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming. So walk with him, and God will make you fruitful. Look for the return of Jesus, and that'll keep you motivated, because we all know our time is limited.
I would want to encourage those who are listening, put in the hard work as you study.
You mean I can't do AI for my next funeral? Okay, I'm sorry.
You could, but and from some funerals I heard it might actually be better.
Be good. Yeah.
More accurate than some I've heard.
That's true.
But people need to understand that ministry, or just having a relationship with the Lord, is work.
Yeah.
Not getting saved.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting saved, I always says, that's the easy part.
That's the easy part, yeah.
It's the discipleship, which takes time and effort, just like, I would say my relationship with my wife.
Sure.
It just doesn't happen.
Right.
You need to make time. You need to, and it's wonderful, but it's one of those things you have to make time for it. You can't just say, oh, well, look, the chips fall where they may. And that's how a lot of people approach Christianity. But when it comes to our daily life with the Lord, I think we need to put in a lot of work.
I agree.
And do things well. I was thinking of yesterday. It was a busy day, very busy day. I woke up at like 5:30, and Stephen came over, one of the deacons at church, and we had a good workout together. I then got on the bike and listened to my Bible reading. And then you came over and we recorded the 31 devotions for August. And as people don't think about how all that stuff comes together, the scripts need to be written, they need to be edited, they need to be filmed, you need to set up the audio, then you have to create all the graphics, then you have to do the actual recording itself. And then you put it up there and you might just have a couple views for a while, but it's like you got to put in the hard work. And then we did that and got all those posted, and then had Bible study last night where we did an Old Testament review. But put in the work, but I think in the long run, it's well worth it. So don't be a lazy AI.
Exactly. When I came over today, I said, I'm back. Because it's just like there's always something else to keep doing, but don't be lazy. You'll be so glad. I always think of Archippus and the letter to the Colossian church is being read, and it says, tell Archippus, to fulfill the ministry. Can you see him just kind of falling down in his pew as that's being done? Just stay with it, everybody, and work hard.
And something I'm happy about is that my daughter is getting baptized on Sunday. My oldest is saved. And that's one of the things as a parent that's always wonderful. It's funny because she's 5, and she totally gets the gospel.
She does.
Right? But she can explain it to you, but it's not head knowledge. My second daughter, Kimmy, she's a sweetheart too, but you can tell she doesn't get it. She can give you all the facts. She's down the cross, rose again, but you can just tell it doesn't mean anything to her. It's just information. Or with Vera, she really gets it. So I'm going to make those videos later this week where we play them during the baptism. But
our gifts have just arrived that we're going to give to them for their baptisms. I won't say more about that, but it's yes, there are 2 actually that, and it's what a privilege for me as granddad to baptize both these young ladies. But so proud of Vera, and you're right, she knows what she believes, and is how exciting.
Because once her sister found out we're having a party, she's like, I want to be baptized too. and this is how you can tell she's not saved. She says, I want to have a party too so they can celebrate me. It's like, I don't think you understand yet. So, but Looking forward to that. So, all right, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll see everyone next time, or you'll at least hear us. And I'm looking forward to it. See ya.